Henry Cole smelled cigarette smoke before he even opened his bedroom door. It slid under the frame and settled in his chest in that tight, familiar way the cardiologist had warned him about. And for a few seconds he just sat on the edge of his narrow bed with his hand over his heart, telling himself not to complain, not to be that old man in his son's apartment. Then he heard the cough from the living room, the thin, dry little cough that belonged to his 8-year-old grandson, and the sound cut clean through his hesitation. Henry pushed himself up, straightened his shoulders the way habit had trained him, and shuffled down the short hallway. The living room was lit only by the blue glow of a cartoon. Liam lay asleep on a thin mattress near the coffee table, one arm over his face, chest hitching now and then. On the sofa sat Megan, shoes off, legs tucked under her, phone in one hand, cigarette in the other. Smoke hung in the air like a gray curtain. He paused in the doorway, fingers on the frame, watching the smoke drift toward the boy's face. Loving Liam felt bigger than his fear of annoying anyone. "Megan," he said, keeping his voice as gentle as he could, "would you mind smoking on the balcony instead? The doctor says the smoke is bad for my heart and—" He glanced at Liam. "For him too." Megan's head snapped up. "What?" she said, frowning as if he'd insulted her. "What did you just say?" "Just the balcony," Henry repeated. "It's the same cigarette. It just won't be right in the boy's lungs." Before she could answer, the front door opened. David stepped in, shoulders tight, tie hanging, briefcase in hand. He smelled the smoke, saw his father in the doorway, his wife with a cigarette, his son coughing on the floor. All the things he'd been carrying, deadlines, rent, quiet resentment that his sick father now lived with them, suddenly needed somewhere to land. "What's going on?" he asked, voice already sharp. "Nothing," Megan said in that tone that meant the opposite. "Your dad doesn't like how I live in my own living room." Henry lifted both palms slightly. "I only asked if she could smoke on the balcony, that's all." "My chest, David." And Liam's cough. To Henry it sounded reasonable. To David, it sounded like judgment. You can't protect your own kid. You can't control your house. His vision narrowed on Henry's old sweater and bay feet. "You don't tell my wife what to do in my home," David snapped, crossing the room in 3 quick steps. "You live here for free. You eat the food I pay for. You don't get to run this place." The word free stung worse than the smell of smoke. Henry opened his mouth to say he handed over half his pension, that he hadn't begged to move in, that heart surgery and his wife's death hadn't left many options, but anger moved faster than words. David's open hand cracked across his cheek with a sound that sliced through the cartoon noise. The slap spun Henry's head. His glasses slipped crooked, his knees buckled before he caught himself on the doorframe. His cheek burned hot, but what hurt more was the shock. The boy he'd carried on his shoulders through cold rain, the teenager he'd worked overtime for, had just raised a hand to him over a cigarette. Megan gasped, her cigarette dropping to the rug. On the mattress, Liam jerked awake with a small cry. The old tablet he'd been holding on his chest, still playing cartoons, jolted. His clumsy thumb had hit the red button in the corner earlier, and now the camera recorded everything. The smoke, the argument, the slap, the way his grandfather folded it on himself. For a heartbeat the room froze. Henry's fingers went to his cheek, touching the heat there. He turned his head slowly, blinking. "David," he whispered, the name itself a question. "Are you really the same boy I raised?" Something like shame flickered across David's face, but pride and anger shoved it down. "Don't look at me like that," he said. "You act like we're trying to kill you. If you don't like the air, go back to your room. Don't lecture my wife. Don't try to control my house, old man." It was the first time he'd ever called him anything but Dad. The words cut deeper than the slap. Megan crossed her arms. "Everyone smokes," she muttered, as if that made it harmless. "He makes everything about my heart, my heart. It's not like I'm doing it on purpose." Liam stared, his world tilting. He loved his dad, who chose him in video games and took him to the park. He loved his granddad, who told him stories and shared biscuits. Seeing one hurt, the other tore something he didn't have language for. He clutched the tablet tighter. The little green timer kept climbing. Henry let his hand fall. He drew a slow breath, feeling the strain against his ribs. "I'm sorry my breathing is such a burden," he said quietly. "I didn't realize wanting to stay alive was so inconvenient." Nobody answered. The silence after that sentence was heavier than all the smoke. Without another word, Henry turned and walked back to his small room. He shut the door gently, sat on the bed, and finally let the tears come, hot and soundless, into his hands. For the next week, the apartment felt wrong even when no one spoke. Henry moved like a ghost, up before dawn, making his own weak tea, staying mostly in his room. When he crossed the living room, he kept his eyes on the floor, like a guest trying not to touch anything. Megan started smoking near the kitchen window on the balcony more often, telling herself it was just to avoid drama, not because she felt guilty. David threw himself into work, staying later at the office, convincing himself that more money would somehow patch everything. No one mentioned the slap. It hung in the air anyway. The only one who kept touching it was Liam. The video sat in his tablet gallery like a live wire. He tried not to look at it, but every time he scrolled past, the frozen thumbnail flashed up, his dad's raised arm, his granddad's bent head. One afternoon at school, a boy wrinkled his nose and said loudly, "You smell like smoke, Liam. Does your mom live inside a cigarette?" A couple of kids snickered. Liam's face went hot. "It's not me," he blurted. "My mom smokes in the living room. My granddad can't breathe." "Yeah, right," the boy said. "Prove it." It was a thoughtless day. To a cornered 8-year-old, it sounded like a challenge he couldn't afford to lose. At break, with hands shaking, Liam pulled out his tablet. He opened the gallery, thumb hovering over the clip he'd never watched. He hit play. On the small screen, their living room appeared, smoky and dim. A handful of boys leaned in, Henry asking politely, voices sharpening, the slap. A couple of them flinched when the sound landed. "Whoa," one whispered. "Is that your dad?" Liam snatched the tablet toward his chest. "Don't tell anyone," he begged. But one boy already had his own phone out, filming the clip right off the tablet screen, Liam's hands and the edge of the desk framing it. He wanted something dramatic to drop into the class group chat. By that evening, the shaky recording had hopped from that chat to a cousin's phone to a neighborhood WhatsApp group, and then into the building residence group that included their upstairs neighbor, Sarah Green. Sarah watched the clip alone at her kitchen table. She knew Henry from the stairwell, the careful way he took the steps, the polite nods, the tired smile. Now she watched his own son's hand swing and heard the words "old man" and felt something twist under her ribs. She could have gossiped and hit forward. Instead, she typed into the building group, "I'm not sharing this to spread drama. But this happened under our roof. If we pretend we didn't see it, we're saying it's okay." She added a line about how easy it was to forget what elders had done for us, then pressed send and sat there watching the blue ticks appear. The chat, usually full of elevator complaints, went quiet. Then messages flooded in. Shock, prayer emojis, older tenants describing how it felt to be treated like luggage, younger ones insisting they'd never do that. No one named Henry, but more than one person mentioned the gentleman on the second floor with the heart surgery. The video slipped out of the group and into other chats anyway. Meanwhile, David sat at his desk, ignoring the buzzing phone until his coworker Mark walked in, closed the office door, and said, "You need to see this." On Mark's phone, David saw his own living room, his own hand. The slap sounded worse than he remembered. "Where did you get that?" he managed. "It's in the staff group," Mark said carefully. "A couple of people recognized your dad from Family Day. Hours talking." David had spent a week telling himself he'd just lost it, that Henry exaggerated, that everybody slipped up. The video ripped those excuses away. It was exactly what it looked like, a grown man hitting his old father because he'd asked not to breathe smoke. He went home early, anger and panic fighting in his chest. He rehearsed lines in his head. "This is private. People shouldn't film everything." But when he opened the apartment door, they died. Henry sat on the sofa, hands folded. Liam curled beside him, chewing his thumbnail. Megan leaned against the wall, arms wrapped tight around herself. On the other chair sat Sarah Green and Mr. Robert Hayes, the retired teacher everyone called when the landlord ignored them. Liam's tablet lay on the coffee table like a piece of evidence. "David," Sarah said, standing. We didn't come to gang up on you. We came because we saw something we can't pretend away. Liam flinched. I'm sorry, Dad, he blurted, eyes flooding. I just wanted to show the boys it's not me who smells like smoke. I didn't know it would go everywhere. The anger David had aimed at the world suddenly swung back where it belonged. The problem wasn't the camera. It was what it had caught. He walked over and crouched in front of Liam. Look at me, he said. When Liam did, David went on quietly. You shouldn't have shown it, but you didn't do anything wrong in that video. I did. This is on me, not you. Mr. Hayes leaned forward. Son, he said, in the voice that had pulled confessions from countless students, what you do in your home is your business until it hits somebody who can't hit back. Your father has a bad heart. Your boy is 8. They don't have your power. That's why this isn't just a family argument. The kids watching will decide what's normal by what they see you do. Megan's eyes dropped. She had grown up in a house where shouting and slamming doors were wallpaper. She told herself one slap between adults was nothing. Hearing normal made her stomach turn. Henry finally raised his head. David, he said quietly, do you remember when you were 8 and your principal called me because you pushed the janitor and made him drop his bucket? David blinked, dragged back to a wet hallway and a younger version of himself. You made me apologize, he muttered. You made me help him clean for a week. I told you then, Henry said, that the way you treat people with less power than you is the way life will end up treating you. I said it because I was afraid of who you might turn into. I never imagined I'd be the one you pushed. The room went still. The anger drained out of David, leaving only shame and a deep, heavy grief. He moved before he quite decided to. One moment he was standing. The next he was on his knees in front of his father, taking Henry's thin hands in his own, bowing his head until his forehead rested against those worn knuckles. Dad, he said, his voice cracking, I'm so sorry. I can say I was stressed or tired, but I still chose to hit you. You deserve better from me than anyone. I've been acting like you're a burden when you're the reason I'm even here. I'm ashamed of myself. Tears filled Henry's eyes. He set one trembling hand on David's head, the way he had when nightmares woke him as a boy. I forgive you, he said softly. I forgave you as soon as you walked out of that room. But forgiveness isn't pretending this didn't happen. If we go back to the way things were, it'll happen again. Something has to change. For my sake. For yours. For Liam's. Those simple words, something has to change, became the hinge the whole family swung on. The next morning, David called his manager and admitted he was the man in the video. He didn't blame Henry or Megan or stress. HR didn't let him off easily. We can't act like this is nothing, the director told him. But if we just fire you, what have you or your boy learned except how to hide? We'll keep you if you take counseling seriously and help us build a session on caring for aging parents. If you don't, we're done. So David ended up in a small room across from Dr. Emily Carter, saying out loud for the first time how scared he was of failing at work, of not earning enough, of ending up sick and broke. Naming those fears didn't excuse what he'd done. It just stopped them from driving him in secret. At home, he made changes you could see. He took Henry to his cardiology appointment and listened as the doctor explained exactly what secondhand smoke did to a damaged heart. That evening he stood in the living room and said, from today, no smoking inside. Not here. Not in the bedroom. Balcony or outside only. I should have done this long ago. Megan stiffened, but she noticed the way Henry's shoulders dropped in relief. She stubbed out the cigarette in her hand and, a few days later, bought nicotine gum and started walking when cravings hit instead of lighting up over the TV. One night she hovered at Henry's door and finally knocked. I'm sorry, she said. You were right about the smoke. I just didn't want to hear it. I'm trying to stop. Henry smiled, tired but warm. We're all trying, he said. That's better than not trying at all. Liam watched everything. He saw his dad come home from therapy quieter, less explosive. He saw his mom shrug on a jacket and step onto the balcony when she wanted a cigarette. He saw his grandfather invited back to the table, his tea refilled without him asking. One afternoon he climbed onto the sofa beside Henry and handed him the tablet. I deleted it, he said. The video. I don't want anyone to see it again. I never watched it, Henry admitted. My cheek remembers, but I'm glad it existed long enough to scare your dad into changing. Sometimes the worst mirror is the one that saves you. The building shifted too. Prompted by Sarah and Mr. Hayes, the residents started a small tea with elders evening once a month in the courtyard. Older tenants, including Henry, told stories about the city when there were still fields at the edge. Younger ones listened, surprised at how much they liked hearing them. At David's office, the clip that had been shared with whispers turned into the start of a frank workshop. He stood in front of colleagues without showing the video and said, "I hit my dad. I hate that I did. I'm grateful I got called out before it became who I was. If you're drowning looking after parents, talk to someone before you snap. Being tired doesn't give you the right to be cruel." Almost a year after the slap, the community center down the block held a small ceremony to honor seniors. Sarah submitted Henry's name. One mild evening, the courtyard was strung with cheap lights and folding chairs. Jason Reed from the center read from his list, "Our next honoree worked decades in this city, raised his children here, and, whether he wanted to or not, reminded a lot of us how important it is to treat our elders with respect. Please welcome Mr. Henry Cole." Henry blinked at the sound of his name. Liam bounced in his seat, clapping. David nudged his father. "Go on, Dad." Henry walked up, slower than he once would have, but steady. Jason handed him a small plaque. The applause was warm. Henry cleared his throat. "I grew up in a time when fathers didn't talk much," he said. "We just worked and hoped we were doing right. This last year, my son and I hurt each other in a way I never expected. Many of you saw a piece of it. It broke my heart, but it also forced us to change. My son apologized. He's working on his temper. I had to admit I wasn't fine and let people help me. I don't recommend a slap in a video as a method," he added, drawing a ripple of laughter. "But I will say this, if your parents are still alive, ask yourself tonight if you're treating them the way you hope your children will treat you. If not, you can still fix it while they're here to see it." When he stepped back, he handed the MIC to David. His son looked out at the faces, neighbors from the stairwell, a few co-workers, kids who waved at him in the hallway. "Most of you know what I did," David said. "I'm not proud of being the man in that video. I'm proud that my father let me try again. Everything changed for me when I saw myself through that lens and through my boy's eyes. If any part of our story feels close to home, don't wait for a video to force you to change." Later, walking back to the apartment under the streetlights, Liam slipped his hand into Henry's. "Granddad," he said quietly, "I'm glad you didn't leave." Henry squeezed his fingers. "So am I," he replied. Inside, the air was clay. The old man sat at the table with his son and grandson, a mug of tea warming his hands, each breath coming a little easier. The night he had simply, politely asked his daughter-in-law not to smoke and been slapped for it had shaken the whole family. It had also cracked them open just enough for the truth to get in, so something better could be built where the hurt had been.